Sarah Mitchell was grading papers at her desk when Principal Rodriguez knocked on her classroom door. It was 4:30 p.m., and Lincoln Elementary was nearly empty. She looked up from the stack of third-grade math tests, wondering why he seemed so serious. "Sarah, I need to speak with you about something I found on your desk." Her heart stopped. In his hands was a small wooden box she thought she'd hidden well enough. The same box that contained a secret she'd spent 3 years trying to forget. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning had started like any other Tuesday at Lincoln Elementary School in Riverside, California. Sarah Mitchell arrived at 6:45 a.m., her usual routine of unlocking classroom 12B and setting up for another day with her 24 third graders. At 29, she'd been teaching for 5 years, and the kids had grown to love her patient demeanor and creative math lessons that somehow made multiplication tables feel like games. What none of them knew was that their quiet, unassuming teacher had once stood on a podium in front of 80,000 screaming fans, a gold medal hanging around her neck while the national anthem played. Sarah had perfected the art of being invisible. She dressed in simple cardigans and comfortable flats, kept her auburn hair in a practical ponytail, and drove a modest Honda Civic that blended seamlessly into the school parking lot. When parents asked about her background during conferences, she'd mention her education degree from UC Davis and quickly redirect the conversation to their child's progress. The wooden box had been a mistake to bring to school, but her tiny apartment felt too cramped for reminders of her past life. She'd thought her desk drawer would be safer. After all, who goes through a teacher's personal belongings? Principal Rodriguez had been looking for a stapler. Sarah's classroom was known for being well organized, and teachers often borrowed supplies from her. The drawer had stuck, and when he'd finally yanked it open with more force than intended, several items had scattered across the floor. Among them was the small wooden box, its contents spilling out like secrets she'd tried so hard to bury. The bronze medal caught the afternoon sunlight streaming through the classroom windows. Not gold, that detail would matter later, but bronze, with Rio 2016 engraved on one side and 100-meter freestyle swimming on the other. Attached was a faded ribbon in Olympic colors, and beneath it a photograph of a younger Sarah standing on the third-place podium, her muscular frame a stark contrast to the soft-spoken teacher Rodriguez thought he knew. Sarah's transformation hadn't happened overnight. 4 years ago, she'd been Sergeant Sarah Mitchell of the United States Army, stationed at Fort Bragg, where she'd served as a combat medic for 6 years before her Olympic dreams became reality. The military had supported her training, granting her special leave to compete. Swimming had been her sanctuary during deployments to Afghanistan, the pool at the base providing the only peace she could find between missions. The road to Rio had been brutal. Dawn training sessions in the base pool, followed by full days of medical duties, then evening workouts that left her exhausted but determined. Her commanding officer, Colonel Patricia Hayes, had believed in her potential when nobody else did. "Mitchell," she'd said, after watching Sarah demolish the base record for the 5th time, "you're not just swimming to stay in shape anymore. You're swimming to represent your country." The Olympic trials had been a whirlwind. Sarah barely qualified for the team, earning her spot by just 0.03 of a second. She wasn't the favorite. That honor belonged to Katie Martinez and Jennifer Chen, both college superstars with endorsement deals and magazine covers. Sarah was the military wildcard, the unknown quantity who'd trained in base pools instead of state-of-the-art facilities. Rio changed everything and nothing all at once. The bronze medal had been a shock to everyone, including Sarah herself. She'd touched the wall, looked up at the scoreboard, and couldn't believe the time next to her name. The ceremony was surreal. Standing on that podium, hearing the anthem, feeling the weight of the medal against her chest, while knowing her unit was watching from their base in Afghanistan. But the Olympics don't last forever, and reality has a way of crashing back. Sarah returned to Fort Bragg a hero for exactly 2 weeks before the demands of military life resumed. The medals and media attention felt increasingly distant as she treated wounded soldiers and dealt with the daily grind of military medicine. Something had shifted inside her during those games, not the glory, but the pressure and expectation that came after. The panic attack started 6 months later during a routine training exercise. The sound of helicopters, which had never bothered her before, suddenly sent her heart racing and her hands shaking. Combat zones she'd navigated with steady nerves now felt overwhelming. Her performance reviews remained excellent, but privately, Sarah knew she was struggling with something she couldn't quite name. Colonel Hayes had been understanding when Sarah requested a transfer to a non-combat role. The Army offered her positions at recruiting stations, training facilities, even a coaching position with the Olympic Development Program. But Sarah had made up her mind. She needed to disappear entirely from the world that had created both her greatest triumph and her deepest struggles. Teaching had never been part of the plan, but the education benefits from her military service made returning to school possible. UC Davis had a strong teacher preparation program, and Sarah found herself drawn to elementary education. Working with children felt like healing in a way she couldn't explain. Their innocence and enthusiasm reminded her why she'd wanted to serve her country in the first place. The transition hadn't been easy. Her first year teaching, Sarah would sometimes catch herself scanning exits and feeling anxious when parents raised their voices during conferences. The structure of military life had been replaced by the organized chaos of third grade, but gradually she'd found peace in lesson planning and homework correction that she'd never experienced on base. None of her colleagues knew about her past. As far as Lincoln Elementary was concerned, Sarah Mitchell was a dedicated first-year teacher who'd gotten into education after completing her military service, a common enough story that nobody pressed for details. She'd legally changed her name from her military surname, Patterson, making it nearly impossible for casual searches to connect her teaching career with her Olympic achievement. The wooden box had been a gift from Colonel Hayes during Sarah's discharge ceremony. "For the days when you forget how strong you are," she'd written in a card that Sarah kept tucked beneath the medal. Sarah hadn't opened the box in 2 years, but something about the anniversary of Rio approaching had made her bring it to school. She'd planned to look at it during lunch, maybe remember what it felt like to believe in herself that completely. Now Principal Rodriguez stood in her doorway, holding evidence of a life she'd worked so hard to leave behind. His expression wasn't accusatory, but genuinely curious and perhaps a little concerned. In 5 years of working together, Sarah had never given him reason to doubt her competence or dedication. She was the teacher other staff members went to for advice, the one parents requested specifically for their struggling students. "I think we need to talk," he said quietly, stepping into the classroom and closing the door behind him. "Sarah, is there something you want to tell me about your background?" The question hung in the air between them, like a bridge Sarah wasn't sure she was ready to cross. Principal Rodriguez set the wooden box carefully on Sarah's desk, his weathered hands treating it with unexpected reverence. At 53, Miguel Rodriguez had been running Lincoln Elementary for 12 years, and he'd developed an instinct for reading people. The woman sitting across from him wasn't the same person he'd hired 3 years ago. "You don't have to explain anything," he said, settling into one of the small plastic chairs meant for 8-year-olds. "But I'd like to understand." Sarah's fingers trembled as she reached for the box. The bronze medal felt heavier than she remembered, its surface slightly tarnished but still bearing the distinctive Olympic rings. She'd forgotten how the weight of it used to feel like validation, like proof that all the sacrifices had meant something. "I was a different person then," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sarah Patterson, that's who won this medal." Rodriguez leaned forward, his dark eyes filled with genuine interest rather than judgment. In his years as an educator, he'd learned that everyone carries stories, but few were as carefully hidden as this one. What happened to her? The question unlocked something Sarah hadn't accessed in months. She found herself talking about the nightmares that started after Rio, the way success had felt more like a burden than a celebration. The media attention had been brief but intense, a feel-good story about the soldier swimmer who'd beaten the odds. For 3 weeks, her face was on cereal boxes and talk shows, her inbox flooded with endorsement offers and speaking requests. Everyone wanted to know the secret, Sarah continued, absently turning the medal over in her hands. They wanted an inspirational story about overcoming obstacles and achieving dreams. But the truth was messier than that. Rodriguez remained silent, understanding that some stories needed to unfold at their own pace. The real story began with deployment number 3. Sarah had been 25, stationed at a forward operating base in Helmand Province, where she served as the primary medic for a unit of 40 soldiers. The base had a makeshift pool, really just a large container filled with treated water, where she'd swim laps after her shifts, trying to wash away the memories of treating injuries that would have been fatal anywhere else. Swimming had always been Sarah's escape, but in Afghanistan it became something more urgent. The repetitive motion of stroke after stroke created a meditation that helped her process the trauma she witnessed daily. Young soldiers arriving with blast injuries, medevac helicopters landing in clouds of desert dust, the constant tension of knowing that any routine patrol could result in casualties. Lieutenant Daniel Reeves had been the first to suggest she pursue competitive swimming seriously. He'd been an NCAA Division I swimmer at Stanford before joining the Army, and he recognized technique that transcended recreational fitness. "Patterson, you're not just good," he told her after watching her demolish what passed for base records. "You're scary good." The idea seemed impossible at first. Olympic-level swimmers trained 8 hours a day in world-class facilities with teams of coaches and nutritionists. Sarah was a combat medic working 12-hour shifts in a war zone, swimming in a glorified bathtub when she could find the time. But Daniel was persistent, timing her laps with a waterproof stopwatch he'd ordered online, comparing her splits to national qualifying standards. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The numbers were undeniable. Even accounting for the smaller pool and less than ideal conditions, Sarah was posting times that would have placed her in the top 10 at the previous year's national championships. Daniel started forwarding the results to contacts he still had in the swimming world, coaches who might be willing to take a chance on an unconventional athlete. The response surprised everyone. Coach Michelle Torres at the Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs had built her reputation on finding diamonds in the rough, swimmers who'd been overlooked by traditional programs but possessed the raw talent and work ethic to compete at the highest level. She'd coached 3 Olympic medalists, all athletes who'd come to the sport later than their peers or had overcome significant obstacles. "Send me everything," Torres had written back. "Times, training logs, medical records, psychological evaluations. If she's legitimate, we can make this work." The Army's world-class athlete program had been Sarah's pathway to possibility. The military had a long history of supporting soldiers with Olympic potential, providing training opportunities and adjusted duty assignments that allowed athletes to pursue their goals while maintaining their service commitments. Colonel Hayes had been skeptical initially. Sarah was one of her best medics, and the unit was already understaffed. Losing her for months of training would create significant operational challenges. But she'd also watched Sarah struggle with the psychological toll of repeated deployments, and she recognized that her soldier needed something beyond military medicine to stay mentally healthy. "If this keeps you in the Army and keeps you sane, then we'll make it work," Hayes had said during Sarah's final interview for the program. "But understand, this isn't a vacation. You'll be representing more than yourself out there." The transition to Colorado Springs felt like entering another world. The Olympic Training Center was everything Sarah had never experienced. Pristine 50-meter pools, underwater cameras for stroke analysis, altitude chambers, sports psychologists, and nutritionists who calculated her caloric intake down to individual macronutrients. After years of eating MREs and swimming in makeshift pools, the facility felt almost overwhelming in its sophistication. Coach Torres was exactly what Sarah needed: demanding but understanding, technical but practical. She'd worked with military athletes before and understood the unique challenges they faced. Unlike civilian swimmers who'd been specializing since childhood, military athletes brought mental toughness and discipline that often compensated for technical gaps in their training. "You swim like you're trying to survive," Torres observed during Sarah's first week. "We need to teach you to swim like you're trying to win." The distinction was crucial. Sarah's stroke was powerful but inefficient, designed for endurance rather than speed. Her starts and turns were technically sound but lacked the explosive power needed to gain precious tenths of seconds. Most importantly, her racing mentality was defensive. She swam not to lose rather than swimming to dominate. The months that followed were the most physically and mentally demanding of Sarah's life, and that included combat deployments. 6 hours in the pool daily, split between technique work, speed sets, and distance training. Weight room sessions focused on explosive power and injury prevention. Video analysis of every stroke, every turn, every breath. Mental training with sports psychologists who helped her visualize success instead of simply avoiding failure. The breakthrough came during a time trial 5 months into her training. Torres had invited several college coaches and former Olympians to watch Sarah swim a 100-meter freestyle, essentially a mock tryout to gauge her progress. Sarah had been nervous, aware that this single swim might determine whether the program continued supporting her Olympic dreams. She touched the wall and looked up at the scoreboard, expecting to see improvement, but not expecting the number that appeared: 53.42 seconds. The pool deck fell silent. It wasn't just a personal best. It was a time that would have qualified for the previous Olympics and placed her among the top 5 swimmers in the country in her event. Coach Torres smiled for the first time since Sarah had arrived in Colorado Springs. "Now you're not just surviving," she said, "you're hunting." Principal Rodriguez glanced at his watch, realizing they'd been talking for over an hour. The custodial staff had already begun their evening rounds, but neither he nor Sarah seemed ready to end this conversation. The bronze medal lay between them on the desk, no longer a hidden secret, but a bridge connecting 2 versions of the same person. "The time trial changed everything," Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. "Suddenly, I wasn't just a soldier who could swim fast. I was a legitimate Olympic contender." The months leading up to the Rio trials became a carefully orchestrated balance between military duty and athletic ambition. Sarah maintained her medical certifications through correspondence courses and periodic training exercises at Fort Carson, but her primary focus shifted to the pool. The Army had invested too much in her development to let administrative details derail her progress. Media attention began building slowly, then accelerated as Sarah's times continued dropping. Swimming World magazine featured her in an article titled "The Unlikely Olympian," profiling military athletes preparing for Rio. The piece included photos of Sarah in both her Army uniform and racing suit, a visual contrast that captured public imagination. Here was someone who saved lives by day and broke records by night, embodying a version of American excellence that transcended traditional athletic narratives. But success brought complications Sarah hadn't anticipated. Sponsors began approaching her with endorsement deals, opportunities that required careful navigation due to military regulations about personal profit from her service status. The Army's legal department worked with sports agents to structure agreements that wouldn't compromise her military standing, creating contracts that deferred most payments until after her active duty ended. More challenging than the business aspects were the psychological pressures. Every training session was now scrutinized, every time trial analyzed by coaches, media, and competitors looking for weaknesses or signs of vulnerability. Sarah found herself swimming not just against the clock, but against expectations that grew heavier with each passing month. Coach Torres recognized the signs early. She'd seen talented athletes crumble under pressure before, their technical skills intact, but their mental game deteriorating as stakes increased. During one particularly difficult training session, when Sarah's times had plateaued despite months of progressive improvement, Torres made a decision that would prove crucial. "We're going back to basics," she announced, dismissing the team of assistant coaches and sports scientists who'd gathered to analyze Sarah's stroke mechanics. "Just you, me, and the water, like it was in Afghanistan." The approach worked. Stripped of the complex technical analysis and constant monitoring, Sarah rediscovered the meditative quality that had drawn her to swimming in the first place. Her times began dropping again, but more importantly, she began racing with the fearless confidence that had characterized her military service. The Olympic trials in Omaha represented the culmination of 2 years of preparation, but they also marked Sarah's first experience with the full intensity of elite competitive swimming. The venue buzzed with energy she'd never encountered, even in combat zones. Thousands of spectators, dozens of media personnel, and the weight of dreams that extended far beyond individual ambition. Sarah's event, the 100-meter freestyle, was scheduled for day 4 of the trials. She used the preliminary days to acclimate, watching other events and studying the routines of veteran swimmers who'd been through this process multiple times. The established stars moved through the venue with practiced calm, their preparations refined through years of high-level competition. What struck Sarah most was the loneliness. Despite being surrounded by teammates, coaches, and support staff, each swimmer ultimately faced the water alone. The parallel to combat was unmistakable. All the training and preparation ultimately came down to individual performance under extreme pressure. The night before her preliminary swim, Sarah couldn't sleep. Her small hotel room overlooked the Missouri River, and she spent hours staring out at the dark water, thinking about the journey that had brought her to this moment. 6 months earlier, she'd been treating wounded soldiers in a field hospital. Now, she was 12 hours away from potentially qualifying for the Olympics. She called Colonel Hayes at 2 a.m., knowing her commanding officer would be awake due to the time difference at her current deployment location. The conversation lasted only 10 minutes, but Hayes provided the perspective Sarah needed. "Remember why you started swimming," Hayes said, her voice crackling through the international connection. "Not for medals or recognition, but because it made you whole. That version of yourself is still there. Trust her." The preliminary swim went exactly as planned. Sarah qualified 3rd overall with a time of 53.18, a new personal best that established her as a legitimate medal contender. The semifinal, held the following evening, would determine the 8 swimmers who'd compete for Olympic spots in the final. Between sessions, Sarah found herself dealing with media attention unlike anything she'd experienced. Reporters wanted to know about her military service, her unconventional path to elite swimming, her thoughts on representing both the Army and the United States on the world's biggest stage. The questions were respectful but persistent, and Sarah struggled to articulate motivations that felt deeply personal and difficult to explain to people who'd never worn a uniform or treated combat casualties. One interview, conducted by a former Olympic swimmer turned broadcaster, cut closer to the truth than Sarah expected. What drives someone who's already served their country in the most meaningful way possible to pursue another form of service through sport? The question caught Sarah off guard. She'd never explicitly connected her military service with her athletic ambitions, but the interviewer had identified something essential about her motivation. Swimming wasn't an escape from her identity as a soldier, it was another expression of the same fundamental drive to push beyond perceived limitations in service of something larger than herself. "I think it's about proving that the people who defend this country are capable of excellence in whatever they choose to pursue," Sarah said, the words coming out more confidently than she felt. "We're not just soldiers, we're complete human beings with dreams and talents that extend beyond our military roles." The semifinal swim became a defining moment in Sarah's athletic career, though not in the way anyone expected. She touched the wall in 4th place with a time of 52.91, qualifying for the final but well behind the race favorites. More importantly, the swim felt different from anything she'd experienced before, controlled but aggressive, tactical but instinctual. Coach Torres was ecstatic. "That wasn't just fast," she said as Sarah climbed out of the pool. "That was smart. You raced like a veteran." The final brought pressure unlike anything Sarah had encountered, even in combat. The 8 fastest women in America, each representing years of dedication and sacrifice, each carrying the dreams of coaches, families, and communities. Only the top 2 would earn automatic Olympic spots, while the third-place finisher would likely make the team based on world ranking criteria. Sarah's lane assignment put her in the middle of the pool, surrounded by swimmers she'd watched on television and admired from afar. The pre-race routine felt surreal, the formal introductions, the national anthem, the moment of silence before swimmers took their marks. This was the culmination not just of 2 years of training, but of a lifetime of pursuing excellence in service to others. The race itself lasted less than 53 seconds, but those seconds contained an entire career's worth of preparation and determination. Sarah's start was clean, her underwater phase strong, her first 50 meters exactly on pace for the time she needed. At the turn, she was in third place, close enough to the leaders to make a move, but far enough back that she'd need to swim the race of her life. The third 25 meters became a tactical battle. The 2 favorites, Katie Martinez and Jennifer Chen, were pulling away slightly, but Sarah found herself locked in a tight race for the crucial third position with 2 other swimmers. Every stroke mattered, every breath decision could determine Olympic qualification. With 15 meters remaining, Sarah made a decision that would define her athletic career. Instead of trying to match the stroke rate of her competitors, she trusted the technique she'd refined over months of training. Her longer, more powerful strokes began paying dividends as the other swimmers started to fade slightly. The final 5 meters felt like an eternity. Sarah could see the wall approaching, but had no sense of her position relative to the other swimmers. The tunnel vision that comes with oxygen debt made it impossible to track her competitors, leaving her to focus solely on her own technique and timing. She touched the wall and immediately looked at the scoreboard, her vision still blurred from the effort. The numbers came into focus slowly. Martinez first in 52.22, Chen second in 52.31, and Sarah Patterson third in 52.47, a new personal best and, more importantly, a time that virtually guaranteed Olympic qualification. The moment of realization hit her like a physical force. She'd done it. A combat medic from Fort Bragg who'd learned to swim in improvised pools was going to compete at the Olympics. The celebration was brief but intense, Coach Torres jumping into the pool fully clothed, teammates swarming the lane ropes, officials trying to maintain order while allowing the natural emotion of the moment. But even in triumph, Sarah felt a strange detachment. The goal she'd pursued with single-minded focus for 2 years had been achieved, but the feeling was more relief than elation. She'd proven something to herself, and perhaps to others, but the validation felt less complete than she'd anticipated. The weeks between trials and the Olympics passed in a blur of training camps, team meetings, and media obligations. USA Swimming's preparation was meticulous, covering everything from jet lag management to cultural orientation for Rio. Sarah found herself part of a team dynamic she'd never experienced. Elite athletes who competed against each other individually but supported each other as representatives of their country. The military connection provided unexpected bonds. Several other team members had family in various branches of service, and they gravitated towards Sarah as someone who understood the unique pressure of representing not just personal ambition but institutional values. These relationships became crucial as the team prepared for the intensity of Olympic competition. Rio itself was overwhelming in ways that combat deployments hadn't been. The scale of the Olympics dwarfed anything Sarah had experienced. The massive venues, the international media presence, the cultural complexity of a global sporting event held in a country she'd never visited. The Olympic Village became a temporary home for over 10,000 athletes, creating a unique environment where world-class competitors from every sport imaginable lived and trained together. Sarah's event was scheduled for day 6 of the swimming competition, giving her time to acclimate while watching teammates compete. The experience of cheering for others helped her understand the collective nature of Olympic competition, individual achievements that contributed to a larger team narrative. The training sessions in Rio confirmed that Sarah was swimming as fast as she ever had. Her times in practice suggested that another personal best was possible, potentially fast enough for a medal if other swimmers didn't perform at their absolute peak. Coach Torres remained cautiously optimistic, emphasizing process over outcome. "You've already exceeded every expectation," Torres told Sarah during their final strategy session. "Tomorrow, just swim your race. Trust everything we've built over the past 2 years. The result will take care of itself." But Sarah knew that the true test wasn't just about swimming fast. It was about performing under pressure that exceeded anything she'd experienced, even in life-or-death situations as a combat medic. The stakes were different, but the requirement for excellence under extreme stress was remarkably similar. The night before her Olympic race, Sarah walked alone through the Olympic Village, trying to process the magnitude of the moment. In 12 hours, she'd step onto the blocks for the most important race of her life, carrying the expectations of coaches, teammates, and a country that had invested in her unlikely journey from military medic to Olympic contender. The morning of the Olympic final arrived with the kind of humid heat that made Rio feel like a sauna even at sunrise. Sarah woke at 5:30 a.m., her internal clock still adjusting to Brazilian time, but her mind immediately sharp with anticipation. The race wasn't until evening, which meant nearly 12 hours of managing anxiety and maintaining focus. Her roommate, distance swimmer Amanda Torres, no relation to her coach, was still asleep, recovering from her own competition 2 days earlier, where she'd finished a disappointing 6th in the 800-meter freestyle. The contrast wasn't lost on Sarah. Amanda had been favored for a medal but cracked under pressure, while Sarah was the unexpected contender who'd already exceeded every realistic expectation. The team breakfast was a subdued affair. Other swimmers were at various stages of their competition schedules, some celebrating recent victories, others recovering from defeats, a few, like Sarah, facing the biggest races of their careers. Coach Michelle Torres sat beside her, occasionally offering quiet observations about technique, but mostly respecting Sarah's need for mental preparation. "How are you feeling about lane assignments?" Torres asked as they reviewed the heat sheet one final time. Sarah had drawn lane 7, traditionally considered less desirable because it put her away from the central action where the favorites typically raced. But Torres saw it as an advantage. "Lane 7 means you can see everyone," she explained. "You'll know exactly where you stand throughout the race. No surprises, no guessing, just pure racing instinct." The psychological aspect had become increasingly important as the games progressed. Sarah had watched several team members struggle not with physical preparation, but with the mental demands of Olympic competition. The pressure was unlike anything that exists in regular athletic competition. The global audience, the 4-year preparation cycle, the knowledge that this might be their only chance at Olympic glory. Sarah's military background provided unexpected advantages in managing this pressure. Combat situations had taught her to compartmentalize stress, to function effectively when stakes were literally life and death. Swimming a race, even an Olympic final, felt manageable compared to treating wounded soldiers under enemy fire. The night before her Olympic race, Sarah walked alone through the Olympic Village, trying to process the magnitude of the moment. In 12 hours, she'd step onto the blocks for the most important race of her life, carrying the expectations of coaches, teammates, and a country that had invested in her unlikely journey from military medic to Olympic contender. The morning of the Olympic final arrived with the kind of humid heat that made Rio feel like a sauna even at sunrise. Sarah woke at 5:30 a.m., her internal clock still adjusting to Brazilian time, but her mind immediately sharp with anticipation. The race wasn't until evening, which meant nearly 12 hours of managing anxiety and maintaining focus. Her roommate, distance swimmer Amanda Torres, no relation to her coach, was still asleep, recovering from her own competition 2 days earlier, where she'd finished a disappointing 6th in the 800-meter freestyle. The contrast wasn't lost on Sarah. Amanda had been favored for a medal but cracked under pressure, while Sarah was the unexpected contender who'd already exceeded every realistic expectation. The team breakfast was a subdued affair. Other swimmers were at various stages of their competition schedules, some celebrating recent victories, others recovering from defeats, a few, like Sarah, facing the biggest races of their careers. Coach Michelle Torres sat beside her, occasionally offering quiet observations about technique, but mostly respecting Sarah's need for mental preparation. "How are you feeling about lane assignments?" Torres asked as they reviewed the heat sheet one final time. Sarah had drawn lane 7, traditionally considered less desirable because it put her away from the central action where the favorites typically raced. But Torres saw it as an advantage. "Lane 7 means you can see everyone," she explained. "You'll know exactly where you stand throughout the race. No surprises, no guessing, just pure racing instinct." The psychological aspect had become increasingly important as the games progressed. Sarah had watched several team members struggle not with physical preparation, but with the mental demands of Olympic competition. The pressure was unlike anything that exists in regular athletic competition. The global audience, the 4-year preparation cycle, the knowledge that this might be their only chance at Olympic glory. Sarah's military background provided unexpected advantages in managing this pressure. Combat situations had taught her to compartmentalize stress, to function effectively when stakes were literally life and death. Swimming a race, even an Olympic final, felt manageable compared to treating wounded soldiers under enemy fire. The morning of the Olympic final, Sarah walked alone through the Olympic Village, trying to process the magnitude of the moment. In 12 hours, she'd step onto the blocks for the most important race of her life, carrying the expectations of coaches, teammates, and a country that had invested in her unlikely journey from military medic to Olympic contender. The morning of the Olympic final arrived with the kind of humid heat that made Rio feel like a sauna even at sunrise. Sarah woke at 5:30 a.m., her internal clock still adjusting to Brazilian time, but her mind immediately sharp with anticipation. The race wasn't until evening, which meant nearly 12 hours of managing anxiety and maintaining focus. Her roommate, distance swimmer Amanda Torres, no relation to her coach, was still asleep, recovering from her own competition 2 days earlier, where she'd finished a disappointing 6th in the 800-meter freestyle. The contrast wasn't lost on Sarah. Amanda had been favored for a medal but cracked under pressure, while Sarah was the unexpected contender who'd already exceeded every realistic expectation. The team breakfast was a subdued affair. Other swimmers were at various stages of their competition schedules, some celebrating recent victories, others recovering from defeats, a few, like Sarah, facing the biggest races of their careers. Coach Michelle Torres sat beside her, occasionally offering quiet observations about technique, but mostly respecting Sarah's need for mental preparation. "How are you feeling about lane assignments?" Torres asked as they reviewed the heat sheet one final time. Sarah had drawn lane 7, traditionally considered less desirable because it put her away from the central action where the favorites typically raced. But Torres saw it as an advantage. "Lane 7 means you can see everyone," she explained. "You'll know exactly where you stand throughout the race. No surprises, no guessing, just pure racing instinct." The psychological aspect had become increasingly important as the games progressed. Sarah had watched several team members struggle not with physical preparation, but with the mental demands of Olympic competition. This perspective became crucial as afternoon arrived and pre-race nerves began intensifying. Sarah had developed a specific routine for managing competition anxiety, borrowed partly from military stress management and partly from sports psychology training. Physical preparation combined with mental visualization, creating a state of controlled readiness that allowed her to perform at her peak when it mattered most. The call room experience was unlike anything Sarah had encountered in previous competitions. Olympic finals included a formal staging area where the 8 finalists waited for 30 minutes before being escorted to the competition pool. The room was stark and quiet, with minimal furniture and no distractions. 8 chairs arranged in a circle, 8 women who represented the fastest swimmers in the world in their event. The silence was profound. Each swimmer had her own pre-race routine. Some listened to music through headphones, others stared at the floor in deep concentration. A few engaged in subtle stretching or visualization exercises. Sarah found herself studying her competitors, not for tactical advantage, but out of genuine curiosity about how other elite athletes managed this level of pressure. Katie Martinez, the American record holder and gold medal favorite, sat with eyes closed and earbuds in, her breathing slow and controlled. Her preparation looked effortless, the result of multiple Olympic experiences and years of competing at the highest level. Jennifer Chen, the other American, was more visibly nervous, but channeled that energy into focused intensity that suggested she was ready to race. The international competition added layers of complexity Sarah hadn't fully anticipated. The Australian swimmer, Emma Sheffield, held the world record and came to Rio as the defending Olympic champion. Her presence in the call room carried an aura of quiet confidence that came from having already achieved everything the sport had to offer. The question for Sheffield wasn't whether she could win, but whether she could repeat her previous success under completely different circumstances. Most intriguing to Sarah was the Canadian swimmer Marie Dubois, who occupied a similar position as an unexpected finalist. Dubois had improved dramatically over the past year, dropping nearly 2 seconds in her best time and qualifying for her first Olympic team at age 26. Like Sarah, she represented proof that elite athletic performance could emerge from unconventional paths and later than typical development. The escort to the competition pool felt ceremonial, a formal procession that marked the transition from preparation to performance. The arena was packed with nearly 15,000 spectators, creating a wall of sound that was simultaneously energizing and overwhelming. Sarah had competed in large venues before, but never with this level of international attention and media coverage. The warm-up pool provided final preparation opportunities, but Sarah kept her routine minimal. A few easy laps to maintain feel for the water, several practice starts to dial in her timing, brief sprints to activate her racing systems. Coach Torres walked alongside the pool, offering final technical reminders and emotional support. "Remember," Torres said during their last conversation before Sarah reported to the ready room, "you've already won by being here. Everything from now on is a bonus. Race like you have nothing to lose, because you don't." The ready room was the final staging area, where swimmers waited for their individual race introductions. The atmosphere was electric with contained energy. 8 women who had trained their entire lives for this moment, each carrying the hopes of coaches, families, and countries. The wait felt endless, though it lasted only 15 minutes. Sarah used the time for final mental preparation, running through her race strategy and visualizing perfect technique. The plan was straightforward: aggressive but controlled start, strong underwater phase, settle into rhythm for the middle 50 meters, then empty everything in the final length. No tactical complications, no overthinking, just swimming as fast as she'd ever swum in her life. The individual introductions were a spectacle unlike anything Sarah had experienced. Walking out to thunderous applause, seeing her name and military rank displayed on the massive video screens, hearing the announcer detail her unlikely journey from combat medic to Olympic finalist. The moment felt surreal, as if she was watching someone else's life being celebrated. Lane 7 put her at the far edge of the pool, away from the central drama but with a clear view of the entire field. Sarah used the extended introduction ceremony to study the pool, noting the starting block angle and wall configuration that would affect her turns. Every detail mattered when races were decided by hundreds of seconds. The formal race preparation was a choreographed ritual that added to the ceremony of Olympic competition. Swimmers shed their warm-ups, adjusted their goggles, and took practice starts that tested their timing and equipment. Sarah's stroke felt perfect during her practice movements, her timing sharp, her power systems fully activated. "Swimmers, step up," The starter called, beginning the formal sequence that would lead to the race start. Sarah positioned herself behind her starting block, hands at her sides, eyes focused on the water she was about to enter. The pool looked perfect, clear, still, fast. Take your mark. The command brought instant silence to the arena. 15,000 spectators holding their breath, 8 swimmers frozen in starting position, months of preparation condensed into the tension of perfect stillness. Sarah felt her heart rate slow, her vision narrow to the lane ahead of her. This was the moment everything had been building toward. The starting signal seemed to echo forever, but Sarah's reaction was instantaneous. Her start was clean and powerful, her entry angle optimal for the underwater dolphin kicks that would carry her nearly to the 15-meter mark. The water felt perfect, exactly the right temperature and density for fast swimming. She surfaced in 4th place, exactly where she'd hoped to be based on her seed time and race strategy. The early pace was fast but sustainable, with Martinez and Sheffield setting the tempo from the central lanes. Sarah settled into her rhythm, her stroke rate comfortable but ready to increase when the tactical situation demanded it. The first 50 meters passed exactly according to plan. Sarah hit the wall at 25.12, her best split ever, and perfectly positioned for the race she wanted to swim. More importantly, she felt strong and controlled, with plenty of racing left for the second half where races were typically won or lost. The turn was crucial, a place where technique under pressure could gain or lose precious time. Sarah's rotation was fast and clean, her underwater phase explosive, her breakout timed perfectly to maximize distance without sacrificing stroke rhythm. She surfaced in 3rd place, now within striking distance of the medal positions. The third 25 meters became a tactical battle that would determine the final outcome. Martinez had taken the lead and was pulling away slightly, swimming at a pace that suggested she was ready to break the American record. Sheffield was holding 2nd place but working harder than usual to maintain contact with the Americans' aggressive early speed. Sarah found herself in a tight race for the bronze medal position with Chen and Dubois, the 3 swimmers separated by less than 0.2 of a second with 25 meters remaining. This was the moment Coach Torres had prepared her for, the point where physical preparation met mental toughness and tactical awareness. Instead of trying to match the stroke rate of her competitors, Sarah trusted the longer, more powerful stroke that had brought her this far. The technique required more oxygen and demanded perfect timing, but it was her natural strength and the foundation of all her improvement over the past 2 years. With 15 meters remaining, Sarah could sense she was gaining on the swimmers beside her. Her stroke felt smooth and powerful, her kick providing steady propulsion, her timing synchronized perfectly with her breathing pattern. The wall was approaching fast, but she felt like she had more speed available if needed. The final 10 meters required everything Sarah had learned about racing under pressure. Technique began breaking down slightly as oxygen debt increased, but her stroke held together better than her competitors. She could see Chen starting to fade slightly in lane 6, while Dubois was maintaining her speed but not improving her position. With 5 meters left, Sarah made a decision that would define her Olympic experience. Instead of simply trying to touch the wall first, she extended her stroke slightly, reaching for maximum distance per stroke, even though it meant a slightly lower stroke rate. The choice was instinctual, based on thousands of hours of training that had programmed optimal technique into muscle memory. She touched the wall with everything she had, immediately looking to the scoreboard to see the result. The numbers seemed to take forever to appear, but when they finally materialized, Sarah couldn't immediately process what she was seeing. The scoreboard showed her name in 3rd place, with a time of 52.31, a new personal best by 0.16 of a second and fast enough for the bronze medal at the Olympic Games. The reality of winning an Olympic bronze medal didn't sink in immediately. Sarah floated in the pool for several seconds, staring at the scoreboard as if the numbers might change. 3rd place, 52.31, personal best, Olympic medalist. The concepts felt disconnected from her physical experience, like reading about someone else's achievement. Coach Torres was screaming from the deck, though Sarah couldn't make out the words over the roar of the crowd. The other swimmers were already climbing out of the pool, some celebrating, others clearly disappointed with their performances. Sarah remained in the water, needing a moment to process what had just happened before facing the chaos that inevitably followed Olympic success. Katie Martinez had won gold in 51.89, a new American record that established her as one of the greatest sprinters in history. Emma Sheffield, the defending champion, had touched second in 52.12, adding silver to her collection but falling short of repeating her previous triumph. Sarah's bronze medal time would have won gold at the previous Olympics, highlighting how dramatically the sport had evolved in just 4 years. The immediate aftermath was a whirlwind of drug testing protocols, media interviews, and administrative procedures that Olympic medalists must complete before celebrating their achievements. Sarah found herself swept into a system designed to manage the logistics of international competition, where personal triumph became part of a larger organizational process. The drug testing facility was sterile and efficient, staffed by officials who treated Olympic champions with the same matter-of-fact professionalism they applied to all competitors. Sarah provided the required samples while still wearing her racing suit, the physical proof of her performance, the chlorine smell clinging to her skin like evidence of what she'd accomplished. During the mandatory 90-minute wait for test results, Sarah finally had time to contact the people who mattered most. Her first call was to Colonel Hayes, who was deployed in Afghanistan but had arranged to watch the race via satellite feed despite the challenging time difference. "Patterson, you magnificent soldier," Hayes said, her voice cracking with emotion that she rarely displayed. "I've watched that race 3 times already. You swam like a warrior." The conversation lasted only 10 minutes due to communication constraints at Hayes' location, but it provided the validation Sarah needed. Her commanding officer understood both the military discipline and competitive drive that had made this achievement possible. More importantly, Hayes helped put the medal in perspective. It was extraordinary, but it didn't define Sarah's worth as a person or a soldier. The call to her parents in Ohio was more complicated emotionally. Sarah's relationship with her family had been strained since she joined the Army, their concerns about military service creating tension that Olympic success couldn't entirely resolve. But her mother cried during the phone call, admitting she'd never fully understood Sarah's athletic ambitions until watching her compete on the world's biggest stage. "We're so proud of you," her father said, his voice thick with emotion he rarely expressed. "Not just for the medal, but for everything you've accomplished, the Army, the Olympics, all of it." The medal ceremony took place 2 hours after the race, giving Sarah time to shower, change into team formal wear, and mentally prepare for the moment that would define her Olympic experience. The ceremony protocol was elaborate and precisely choreographed, with specific positions, movements, and timing that transformed individual achievement into national celebration. Walking onto the medal podium felt surreal. The bronze medal position put her to the right of the gold and silver medalists, slightly lower than the top step but elevated above the pool deck where she'd just achieved the performance of her lifetime. The arena was still packed with spectators who'd remained to witness the ceremony, creating an atmosphere of celebration that transcended individual nationalities. The medal itself was heavier than Sarah had expected, with intricate design details that spoke to the craftsmanship and significance of Olympic achievement. The ribbon felt substantial against her neck, the weight of the medal settling against her chest like a physical reminder of 2 years of preparation and a lifetime of pursuing excellence. But the national anthem truly affected her. Standing on that podium while the national flag rose to the highest position, hearing the familiar melody that she had listened to countless times during military ceremonies, she felt the full emotional impact of representing her country at the highest level of international competition. The moment connected her military service with her athletic achievement in ways she'd never anticipated. Tears came without warning, not from sadness, but from overwhelming gratitude for the opportunity to excel in service of something larger than personal ambition. The anthem lasted only 90 seconds, but it contained years of sacrifice, months of doubt,
and the validation that exceptional performance was possible regardless of conventional expectations or traditional pathways. The media obligations that followed were extensive and exhausting. Olympic bronze medalists, especially those with compelling personal stories, were in high demand for interviews that would help broadcasters fill programming time and satisfy public curiosity about the personalities behind athletic achievement.
Sarah's military background made her particularly interesting to journalists looking for narrative angles that transcended pure athletic performance. The combination of combat service and Olympic success created a story template that appealed to editors seeking content that would resonate with diverse audiences. The interviews revealed how unprepared Sarah was for the attention that accompanied Olympic success. Questions about her military service required careful navigation to respect operational security while providing sufficient detail to satisfy public interest. Discussions of her training methods needed to balance technical accuracy with accessibility for general audiences who had never experienced elite athletic preparation. More challenging were questions about her future plans. Reporters wanted to know whether she'd continue competing, pursue endorsement opportunities, or return to full-time military service. Sarah realized she'd been so focused on reaching the Olympics that she'd given little thought to what came next, leaving her scrambling to provide answers that sounded thoughtful and decisive. The endorsement opportunities materialized quickly. Within hours of her medal ceremony, agents and marketing representatives were approaching her with preliminary offers for sponsorship deals, appearance fees, and product endorsements. The financial possibilities were substantial, potentially exceeding her military salary by significant margins. But the military regulations governing outside income created complex considerations that required legal consultation. Active duty service members faced restrictions on commercial activities that could be perceived as trading on their military status for personal profit. Sarah would need to navigate these regulations carefully to pursue opportunities without compromising her military standing. The 3 weeks following Rio became a carefully managed balance between celebration and obligation. USA Swimming arranged media appearances and sponsored events that showcased their Olympic success while providing athletes with opportunities to capitalize on their achievements. Sarah participated in several events, but her military commitments limited her availability compared to civilian athletes. The homecoming at Fort Bragg was overwhelming in its own way. The base community had followed Sarah's Olympic journey with pride, organizing viewing parties for her races and celebrating her medal as a collective achievement. Her fellow medics had decorated her workspace with Olympic-themed banners and congratulatory messages that reflected their shared pride in her success. Colonel Hayes organized a formal ceremony recognizing Sarah's achievement, attended by base leadership and covered by local media outlets. The event highlighted the Army's support for soldier athletes while emphasizing the values of excellence and dedication that applied to both military service and athletic competition. But beneath the celebration, Sarah was struggling with psychological challenges she hadn't anticipated. The intense focus required for Olympic preparation had provided structure and purpose that suddenly disappeared after Rio. Without the daily training demands and competitive goals that had defined her routine for 2 years, she felt adrift and uncertain about her direction. The condition had a name: post-Olympic depression. Many elite athletes experienced similar challenges after major competitions, struggling to find motivation and meaning when their primary source of identity and purpose was no longer relevant. Sports psychologists recognized the syndrome as a normal response to achieving long-term goals, but understanding it intellectually didn't make experiencing it any easier. Sarah's military training helped her recognize the symptoms early. The disrupted sleep patterns, decreased motivation, and general sense of emptiness were familiar from her experience treating soldiers dealing with post-deployment adjustment. But recognizing the problem and solving it were different challenges entirely. Coach Torres had warned her about this possibility during their final conversations in Rio. "The medal is just the beginning," she'd said. "The real challenge is figuring out who you are when you're not chasing Olympic dreams." The advice proved prophetic. Sarah found herself questioning not just her athletic future, but her broader life direction. Military service had provided a stable identity and clear purpose for 8 years, but her Olympic success had opened possibilities she'd never considered. The choice between continuing her established path and exploring new opportunities felt overwhelming. The decision point came during a conversation with Colonel Hayes 6 weeks after Rio. Sarah had been struggling with motivation for both training and military duties, her performance adequate but lacking the intensity that had characterized her previous work. Hayes recognized the signs and initiated a direct conversation about Sarah's future plans. "You're not the same soldier who left for Colorado Springs," Hayes observed during their meeting. "That's not necessarily bad, but we need to acknowledge it and figure out what comes next." The assessment was accurate, but difficult to hear. Sarah's identity had been built around military service, but her Olympic experience had revealed interests and capabilities that extended beyond her role as a combat medic. The conflict between established identity and emerging possibilities was creating internal tension that affected every aspect of her life. Hayes suggested several options: continuing active duty with modified responsibilities that accommodated continued training, transitioning to reserve status that would allow pursuit of civilian opportunities, or remaining on active duty while serving as an Army recruiter and ambassador for military athletics programs. Each possibility had advantages and drawbacks. Continued active duty would maintain the stability and benefits of military service, but might limit athletic and professional opportunities. Reserve status would provide flexibility, but reduce the financial security that military service offered. Recruiting assignments would combine military service with public representation, but might require travel and activities that interfered with training. The decision was complicated by endorsement offers that required careful evaluation. Several major sponsors were interested in multi-year agreements that could provide substantial financial security, but would require significant time commitments for commercial activities. The potential income was attractive, but Sarah worried about the authenticity of representing products and brands that didn't align with her personal values. More appealing were opportunities to work with military and veterans organizations, using her Olympic platform to advocate for soldier athletes and veterans issues. These roles would align with her values while allowing her to remain connected to the military community that had supported her development. The breakthrough came during a conversation with Emma Sheffield, the Australian swimmer who'd won Olympic silver 4 years earlier. Sheffield had faced similar decisions after her first Olympic medal 4 years earlier, choosing to continue competing while pursuing graduate education in sports psychology. Her perspective helped Sarah understand that success created options rather than obligations.
"The medal doesn't define you," Sheffield explained during a post-competition dinner in Rio. "It's just proof that you're capable of excellence. The question is where you want to apply that capability next." The insight reframed Sarah's thinking about her future. Instead of viewing her Olympic success as the pinnacle of her achievements, she began seeing it as evidence of her ability to excel in whatever she chose to pursue. The medal was validation, not destination. 3 months after Rio, Sarah made her decision. She would transition to reserve status, allowing her to maintain her military connection while pursuing opportunities in sports medicine and athletic development. The choice provided stability while creating flexibility for continued competition and professional growth. The transition required extensive planning and coordination with military personnel offices, but the Army was supportive of her decision. Sarah's Olympic success had generated positive publicity for military athletics programs, and her continued involvement as a reservist would allow the Army to benefit from her achievements while supporting her personal development. Coach Torres was enthusiastic about Sarah's decision to continue training, though at a reduced intensity that acknowledged her other commitments. They developed a modified training program that would keep her competitive while allowing time for education and professional development. The endorsement negotiations resulted in selective partnerships with companies whose values aligned with Sarah's military background and personal principles. She declined several lucrative offers that would have required extensive commercial activities, instead choosing relationships that supported her long-term goals rather than maximizing short-term income.
But even with careful planning and thoughtful decision-making, the transition from full-time athlete to multifaceted professional was challenging. Sarah struggled to find the same intensity and focus for divided attention that she'd maintained when training was her primary responsibility. The medals ceremony felt increasingly distant, like a peak experience that might never be repeated or exceeded. The solution came from an unexpected source: her work with young military recruits who were interested in athletics. Teaching swimming and fitness to soldiers reminded Sarah why she'd fallen in love with the sport originally. Not for medals or recognition, but for the pure joy of movement and the satisfaction of improvement through effort. Working with these athletes also reminded her that excellence could be expressed in many ways beyond Olympic medals. Helping a young soldier overcome fear of deep water was as meaningful as touching the wall first in an Olympic final. Teaching proper stroke technique to prevent injury was as important as perfecting racing starts for competitive advantage. Principal Rodriguez had been listening intently for over 2 hours, but as Sarah's story reached the months following Rio, he noticed something shift in her demeanor. The confidence and clarity that had characterized her descriptions of training and competition gave way to something more hesitant, more uncertain. This part of her story was clearly more difficult to tell. "The hardest part wasn't winning the medal," Sarah continued, her fingers still absently turning the bronze disc over in her hands. "It was figuring out what to do with the person I'd become." The 18 months following her Olympic success had been a period of profound personal upheaval disguised as professional achievement. On paper, everything looked perfect: military reserve status that provided stability, endorsement deals that offered financial security, and opportunities to work in sports medicine that aligned with her interests and background. But the reality was far more complicated. The sports medicine program at UC Davis had accepted her application for graduate study, recognizing that her unique combination of military medical experience and elite athletic background would bring valuable perspective to their research. The program specialized in treating military personnel and veterans, focusing on injuries common to service members and the psychological challenges faced by former athletes transitioning to civilian careers. Sarah's thesis research examined the parallels between post-deployment stress and post-competition depression among elite athletes. The topic wasn't academic for her. It was deeply personal, an attempt to understand her own struggles by studying similar experiences in others. The research revealed striking similarities between soldiers returning from combat zones and athletes retiring from elite competition. Both populations struggling to find meaning and identity after intense, purpose-driven experiences. The work was intellectually stimulating but emotionally challenging. Interviewing former Olympic athletes about their post-competition struggles forced Sarah to confront her own unresolved feelings about identity and purpose. Many of the athletes she studied had achieved greater success than her bronze medal, yet they described similar feelings of emptiness and confusion when their competitive careers ended. More disturbing were the parallels with military personnel she'd treated for post-traumatic stress. The hypervigilance, sleep disruption, and difficulty adjusting to civilian routines that characterized combat stress reactions were remarkably similar to what retired athletes experienced when transitioning away from elite competition. The research suggested that both groups were dealing with the loss of extreme structure and purpose that had defined their identities. The reserve military duties provided grounding, but also highlighted how much she'd changed since Rio. Sarah found herself assigned to a medical unit at Travis Air Force Base, treating routine injuries and conducting fitness evaluations for personnel preparing for deployment. The work was important but felt mundane compared to the intensity of her previous experiences as both a combat medic and Olympic athlete. Her fellow reservists knew about her Olympic success, but the military culture discouraged drawing attention to individual achievements beyond their relevance to current duties. Sarah appreciated the anonymity in some ways, but she also struggled with feeling like her most significant accomplishment was invisible in her daily work environment. The coaching opportunities that emerged from her Olympic success proved more fulfilling than expected. USA Swimming invited her to work with development programs for military personnel interested in competitive swimming, a role that combined her athletic expertise with her military background. The position required travel to various military installations, conducting clinics and identifying potential talent for national-level competition. These coaching assignments reconnected Sarah with the aspects of swimming she'd loved before the pressure of elite competition had complicated her relationship with the sport. Working with young military swimmers reminded her of her own discovery of competitive potential while deployed in Afghanistan. Many of these athletes had similar backgrounds, soldiers who'd used swimming for fitness and stress relief, gradually realizing they had competitive ability that extended beyond recreational participation. One swimmer in particular, Corporal Jessica Wu, showed remarkable potential, despite having never competed formally before joining the Army. Wu had grown up in rural Montana with limited access to competitive swimming programs, but her natural ability was undeniable. Sarah recognized something of her own journey in Wu's development, the combination of raw talent and military discipline that could produce unexpected excellence. Training Wu became a project that gave Sarah purpose beyond her own competitive goals. The young soldier was eager to learn, but needed technical instruction and tactical awareness that could only come from someone who'd competed at the highest level. Sarah found herself passing on lessons from Coach Torres, adapting elite training methods for an athlete with different circumstances but similar potential. The relationship also forced Sarah to articulate what she'd learned from her Olympic experience, translating intuitive knowledge into teachable concepts. This process helped her understand her own development in ways she'd never considered, recognizing patterns and principles that had contributed to her success. Wu's progress was remarkable. Within 18 months of beginning formal training, she was posting times that qualified her for national-level competition. More importantly for Sarah, coaching Wu's development provided evidence that her Olympic experience had value beyond personal achievement. It could be used to help others pursue their own excellence. The endorsement relationships that Sarah had carefully selected also evolved in unexpected directions. Her partnership with a military-focused fitness equipment company led to consulting work on product development for tactical athletes. The company was developing training equipment specifically designed for military personnel who needed to maintain peak physical condition while deployed in challenging environments. Sarah's input proved valuable because she understood both the physiological demands of elite athletic training and the practical constraints of military deployment. Her suggestions led to equipment modifications that made high-quality training possible in austere environments, contributing to improved fitness outcomes for deployed personnel. This work felt meaningful in ways that traditional endorsement activities didn't. Instead of simply promoting products for commercial gain, Sarah was contributing to solutions that addressed real problems faced by active military personnel. The work combined her medical knowledge, athletic experience, and military background in ways that created genuine value. But even meaningful work couldn't entirely address the psychological challenges Sarah continued to face. The identity confusion that had begun after Rio persisted, manifesting as difficulty making decisions about long-term goals and frequent questioning of her choices. She found herself constantly comparing her post-Olympic life to the intensity and clarity of purpose she'd experienced during her competitive peak. The problem was exacerbated by social media and continued public attention related to her Olympic success. Journalists would occasionally contact her for follow-up stories about life after the Olympics, requiring her to present a coherent narrative about her current activities and future plans. These interactions forced her to articulate a vision for her life that she didn't entirely feel convinced about privately. The breakthrough came during an unexpected conversation with Colonel Hayes, who was visiting California for a military conference and arranged to meet with Sarah. Hayes had followed Sarah's post-Olympic journey with interest, recognizing from their communications that her former soldier was struggling with challenges that weren't entirely visible from the outside. "You're trying too hard to figure out what comes next," Hayes observed during their dinner conversation. "Some of the best soldiers I've known went through periods where they couldn't see the bigger picture. That doesn't mean they were on the wrong path." Hayes shared her own experience transitioning from combat roles to administrative positions as she advanced in rank. The work was important but felt less immediately meaningful than direct patient care or tactical operations. She'd learned that career satisfaction came from finding ways to apply core skills and values rather than seeking to replicate previous experiences exactly. Your medal isn't just an achievement, Hayes continued. It's proof that you can excel when you commit completely to something worthwhile. The question isn't whether you'll do something important again, it's what you'll choose to commit to next. The conversation helped Sarah understand that her post-Olympic struggles weren't evidence of failure, but normal responses to major life transitions. The intensity of Olympic preparation had created artificial clarity about goals and priorities that couldn't be sustained indefinitely. Learning to function without that extreme focus was a skill unto itself. Sarah began approaching her various activities differently, viewing them as experiments rather than permanent commitments. The graduate research work, coaching work, and consulting projects became opportunities to explore interests and develop capabilities rather than steps toward a predetermined career path. This shift in perspective coincided with an unexpected opportunity that would reshape her understanding of her post-Olympic possibilities. The Department of Veterans Affairs was developing a new program combining sports therapy with traditional mental health treatment for veterans struggling with post-service adjustment issues. The program needed clinicians who understood both military culture and the psychological aspects of athletic competition. Sarah's background made her an ideal candidate for the pilot program, but applying required acknowledging that her own post-Olympic struggles had given her insights that could benefit others. The application process forced her to be honest about her challenges while demonstrating how those experiences had contributed to her understanding of transition-related stress. The interview process was extensive, involving both clinical assessments of her counseling potential and evaluations of her ability to work with veterans from various military backgrounds. Sarah's Olympic experience was relevant, but secondary to her military service and medical training, the combination that made her uniquely qualified for this type of work. What emerged from the evaluation process was a clearer understanding of how Sarah's various experiences connected. Her military medical training provided clinical knowledge about trauma and stress responses. Her Olympic experience gave her credibility with high-achieving individuals struggling with identity issues. Her post-competition challenges offered personal insight into the psychological aspects of major life transitions. The program directors were particularly interested in Sarah's research on parallels between post-deployment and post-competition stress. Her academic work had identified intervention strategies that could be adapted for various transition scenarios, contributing to more effective treatment approaches for different veteran populations. Accepting the position represented a significant commitment that would determine Sarah's professional direction for several years. The work would be challenging and emotionally demanding, requiring her to engage with veterans dealing with serious psychological issues while managing her own ongoing adjustment to post-Olympic life. But the opportunity also represented the synthesis of her various experiences in ways that created genuine meaning. Instead of struggling to find purpose after Olympic success, she could use that success as one component of broader capabilities applied to helping others pursue their own transitions. The decision to accept the position marked a turning point in Sarah's post-Olympic journey. Rather than viewing her medal as the peak experience that everything else would be measured against, she began seeing it as preparation for work that might ultimately prove more significant than her athletic achievements.
Coach Torres supported the decision enthusiastically when Sarah informed her about the opportunity. "You've always been a healer," Torres observed. "Your swimming was just one way of expressing that. This sounds like another." The comment resonated with Sarah in ways she hadn't expected. Looking back at her various experiences, military medical service, Olympic competition, coaching young athletes, research on transition stress, she could see consistent themes of helping others overcome challenges and achieve their potential. This recognition helped Sarah understand that her post-Olympic identity crisis had been based on false assumptions about the relationship between peak experiences and ongoing purpose. She'd been trying to find activities that replicated the intensity and external validation of Olympic competition, rather than identifying ways to apply the capabilities that had made that competition possible. The revelation was liberating in ways that surprised her. For the first time since Rio, Sarah felt genuinely excited about future possibilities rather than nostalgic about past achievements. The work with veterans would be demanding and meaningful, offering opportunities to make differences in people's lives that extended far beyond athletic performance. As she prepared to begin the new position, Sarah finally understood what Colonel Hayes had meant about finding ways to apply core skills and values. Her Olympic medal had been proof of her ability to excel when committed to something worthwhile. Now she was choosing to commit that same capability to helping others navigate their own transitions from extraordinary experiences to sustainable purpose. Principal Rodriguez glanced at the clock on Sarah's classroom wall. It was nearly 7 p.m., and they'd been talking for over 3 hours. The custodial staff had finished their rounds, leaving Lincoln Elementary in the quiet stillness that settled over schools after everyone had gone home. But neither of them seemed ready to end this conversation that had transformed from a simple explanation into something much deeper. "So that's how you became Sarah Mitchell the teacher," Rodriguez said, finally understanding the journey that had brought his most dedicated educator to classroom 12B. "But I still don't understand why you kept this hidden. Why not share your story with the kids, with the other teachers?" Sarah carefully placed the bronze medal back in its wooden box, handling it with the reverence of someone who had finally made peace with what it represented. The weight that had once felt like both triumph and burden now seemed like simply another tool in her collection of experiences. "Because I needed to prove to myself that I could be valued for who I am now, not what I accomplished then," she said. "I spent so many years being defined by external achievements, military rank, swimming times, that medal. I needed to know that Sarah the teacher could stand on her own." The path from VA counselor to elementary school teacher hadn't been direct or obvious. Sarah's work with veterans struggling with transition issues had been deeply fulfilling, but after 2 years in the program, she'd begun recognizing patterns that troubled her. Too many of the veterans she counseled had developed their psychological difficulties during childhood, before military service had provided structure and purpose that temporarily masked underlying trauma. The revelation came during a session with Marine veteran Marcus Thompson, a decorated infantry soldier who'd completed 3 combat deployments before developing severe anxiety that prevented him from maintaining civilian employment. As they worked through his history, it became clear that his military service had actually been the most stable and successful period of his life. His real struggles stemmed from childhood experiences with an abusive father and a school system that had failed to recognize his potential. "I was nobody before the Marines," Thompson had said during one particularly breakthrough session. "The Corps made me somebody. Without it, I'm just a scared kid again who can't read worth a damn." Thompson's reading difficulties had never been properly addressed during his education, creating academic struggles that led to behavioral problems and a negative cycle that convinced him he was incapable of success. The military had provided structure and clear expectations that allowed him to excel despite his learning differences, but civilian life lacked that framework. Sarah began recognizing similar patterns in other veterans she counseled. Many had experienced early academic difficulties that weren't addressed appropriately, leading to diminished self-confidence and limited career options that made military service attractive as an alternative to traditional educational paths. Their post-service struggles often reflected problems that predated their military experience rather than trauma acquired during deployment. This recognition led Sarah to volunteer at a local elementary school that served military families, working with children whose parents were deployed or recently returned from combat zones. She'd expected to help kids understand military culture and cope with family separation, but what she discovered was more fundamental. Many of these children were displaying early signs of the academic and social difficulties she'd seen in veterans years later. The volunteer work revealed Sarah's natural aptitude for elementary education. Her patience with struggling students, combined with her ability to create structure and clear expectations, produced remarkable results with children who'd been labeled as behavioral problems or slow learners. More importantly, she found genuine joy in the daily interactions with young minds that were still forming their understanding of their own capabilities. The decision to pursue teaching certification represented another major career transition, but this time Sarah approached it with clarity about her motivations. She wasn't running from her previous experiences or trying to replicate past successes. She was applying everything she'd learned about helping people overcome challenges and discover their potential. The teacher preparation program at UC Davis built on her existing graduate work in sports medicine and psychology, focusing on elementary education methods and child development. Sarah's background made her particularly interested in learning differences and trauma-informed teaching practices, approaches that recognized how childhood experiences affected academic performance. Her student teaching placement was at a school similar to Lincoln Elementary. Diverse student population, significant number of military families, mix of socioeconomic backgrounds that created complex educational challenges. Sarah's supervising teacher, Mrs. Patricia Chen, quickly recognized her unusual combination of skills and experience. "You teach like someone who's seen what these kids could become," Chen observed after watching Sarah work with a particularly challenging group of third graders. "Most new teachers focus on curriculum. You focus on potential." The observation was accurate. Sarah's military experience had taught her to see capabilities that others might miss, while her work with veterans had shown her the long-term consequences of educational failures. She approached each student as someone with unrealized potential rather than a set of academic deficits to be corrected. This perspective proved especially valuable with students from military families, who often struggled with frequent relocations, parental deployments, and the stress of military life that civilian teachers didn't always understand. Sarah could recognize signs of deployment-related anxiety in children and help them develop coping strategies that addressed their specific circumstances. But her teaching approach extended beyond military families to all students who needed additional support or different learning strategies. Her experience with adult learners in various high-stress environments had taught her that intelligence manifested in many ways, and traditional academic measures often failed to capture student capabilities. The teaching position at Lincoln Elementary became available during Sarah's final semester of student teaching. The school was looking for an educator who could work effectively with their diverse population while bringing fresh approaches to traditional elementary curriculum. Sarah's background made her an ideal candidate, though she was careful not to emphasize her Olympic achievement during the interview process. Principal Rodriguez had been impressed by her combination of maturity, educational innovation, and genuine enthusiasm for elementary teaching. Her references from the VA program and her supervising teacher painted a picture of someone who brought unusual depth and perspective to educational challenges. "What convinced me to hire you," Rodriguez now told Sarah as their evening conversation continued, "was how you talked about the kids during your interview. You didn't see them as problems to be solved, but as people with stories that hadn't been fully written yet." Sarah's first 3 years at Lincoln had confirmed Rodriguez's assessment. Her classroom had become known as a place where struggling students found success and confidence, where behavioral problems were transformed into leadership opportunities, and where academic difficulties were addressed with creativity and persistence. Her military background provided natural classroom management skills, but more importantly, it gave her credibility with students who came from challenging circumstances. Kids who'd been labeled as troublemakers responded to her clear expectations and consistent follow-through, recognizing someone who wouldn't give up on them regardless of their past performance. The Olympic medal had remained hidden because Sarah needed to establish her teaching identity independent of her athletic achievements. She'd wanted her students and colleagues to know her as someone who believed in their potential, not as a celebrity teacher whose fame might overshadow her educational message. But as she'd grown more confident in her teaching abilities, Sarah had begun wondering whether her athletic experience might actually enhance her effectiveness with certain students. Several of her current third graders were showing signs of the same perfectionism and fear of failure that had challenged her during her competitive career. 8-year-old Marcus Rodriguez, the principal's nephew, was brilliant but refused to attempt challenging tasks because he was terrified of making mistakes. 7-year-old Emma Chen pushed herself so hard in every activity that she frequently broke down in tears when her work wasn't perfect. 9-year-old David Thompson had given up on math entirely because he'd decided he was stupid after struggling with multiplication tables.
These children needed to understand that failure was part of learning, that excellence came through persistence rather than natural talent, and that their worth wasn't determined by their performance on any single task. Sarah's Olympic story, particularly her struggles with post-competition identity and her various career transitions, could provide powerful examples of resilience and growth mindset. "Maybe it's time," Sarah said to Rodriguez, voicing thoughts she had been developing for months. "Maybe hiding this part of my story has been a disservice to the kids who need to hear it." Rodriguez nodded thoughtfully. He'd watched Sarah work with struggling students for 3 years, seen her patience with children others had given up on, witnessed her ability to help kids discover capabilities they didn't know they possessed. Adding her Olympic story to that foundation could create something truly powerful. "What would you want them to understand about the medal?" he asked. Sarah considered the question carefully. The bronze medal represented many things: years of training, military service, overcoming obstacles, achieving unlikely goals. But for her students, the most important message might be about what came after the medal, about finding purpose and meaning beyond any single achievement. "I want them to know that the medal doesn't make me who I am," she said finally. "It's just proof that I kept trying when things got difficult. And I want them to understand that everyone has something they can excel at if they're willing to work for it and get help when they need it." The conversation continued for another hour as they discussed how Sarah might incorporate her story into her teaching without making it the focus of her classroom. The goal would be to use her experiences as examples when students needed encouragement or perspective, not to transform her into the Olympic teacher whose athletic achievements overshadow her educational message. They decided she would start small, sharing the story with individual students who might benefit from hearing about overcoming obstacles and finding new directions when original plans didn't work out. If those conversations proved helpful, she could gradually be more open about her background with other students and colleagues. As they finally prepared to leave the empty school building, Rodriguez reflected on how much he'd learned about his colleague during their extended conversation. Sarah's journey from combat medic to Olympic medalist to elementary teacher was remarkable. But what impressed him most was her commitment to using all of those experiences in service of helping others discover their own potential. "You know," he said as they walked toward the parking lot, "I've been an educator for 25 years, and I've never met a teacher with your combination of life experience and classroom skills. These kids are lucky to have you." Sarah smiled, feeling lighter than she had in months. The secret that had felt like a burden was now simply another tool she could use to help her students understand that their current struggles didn't determine their future possibilities. The following Monday, Sarah arrived at school with a new sense of purpose. The wooden box remained in her desk drawer, but it no longer felt like something to hide. When Marcus Rodriguez struggled with a challenging math problem and declared he was too stupid to figure it out, Sarah would have a story about a soldier who thought she was too old and too inexperienced to compete in the Olympics but decided to try anyway. When Emma Chen cried because her art project didn't look exactly like the example, Sarah could share how many times she'd failed to achieve the swimming times she wanted before finally succeeding. When David Thompson gave up on reading because the words seemed too difficult, Sarah could tell him about learning to navigate military medical procedures that seemed impossible until she broke them down into manageable steps. The bronze medal would remain at her desk, not as a hidden shame, but as a reminder that excellence could take many forms, and that every achievement was simply preparation for the next opportunity to make a difference in someone's life.
Principal Rodriguez had been right. Sarah's students were lucky to have her. But as she looked around classroom 12B at the empty desks that would soon be filled with young minds ready to discover their own potential, Sarah realized how lucky she was to have found her true calling. The medal had been proof that she could excel when she committed completely to something worthwhile. Teaching these children was proof that the most worthwhile commitments were often the ones that helped others discover their own capacity for excellence. The story of Sarah Mitchell wasn't really about winning an Olympic medal. It was about a person who kept looking for ways to serve others, whether through military medicine, athletic achievement, or elementary education.
The medal was just one chapter in a longer story about the many ways a single person could make a difference in the world. As students began arriving for another day of learning and discovery, Sarah opened her desk drawer and touched the wooden box one more time. Then she closed the drawer and turned her attention to the real treasures in her classroom. 24 third graders who were just beginning to understand how extraordinary they could become. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.